Thank you so much. Now, continuing. Before we begin today's debate between Montgomery Blair High School and Ivy Bridge Academy, I would like to take a moment to introduce our panel of judges. First is Mr. Aiden Harbour. Who is a rising sophomore in the honors program at Emerson College, where he is majoring in video and media arts. Throughout high school, Mr. Harbour competed in debate. He was a member of the team that won the IPPF World Championship in 2017, representing Westfield Academy in Connecticut. On to our second judge. Mr. Dave Huston has coached debate for over 30 years and has been a part of the IPPF competition since its second year. He's had 3 teams compete in the final round of the IPPF. Mr. Huston served on the IPPF's topic committee and has judged the IPPF written and oral competition for years. In addition to his IPPF activities, Mr. Huston has served 3 terms on the National Speech and Debate Association NSDA Board of Directors. He has been a district chair of the NSDA in Iowa and in Texas. He is highly skilled at tabulating debate tournaments, serving as the tabulation director for the Glen Brooks Tournament, the Tournament of Champions, Green Hill, and the Texas Forensics Association State Tournament. His debate teams have won numerous state, regional, and national competitions. Mr. Huston is an Emory University / Barclay Forum key coach, a member of the Texas Forensic Association Hall of Fame and the NSDA Hall of Fame. Now, on to our third judge. Mr. Joshua Wolk is a 2020 IPPF co-champion. He participated in public forum debate and extemporaneous speaking for all 4 years of high school. Since then, he has hosted virtual debate tournaments both independently and in cooperation with Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. Mr. Wolk also runs a public speaking class for middle school students interested in civil discourse and regularly meets with politicians to advocate for proactive human trafficking prevention legislation on the federal level. Just 45 minutes ago, the 2 teams flipped for sides. At this time, I would like to invite the members of the affirmative team from Montgomery Blair High School to introduce themselves.
Hi, so I guess we are Montgomery Blair, and today we are debating on the affirmative side. My name is Jonathan Wen. I am a junior currently at Montgomery Blair, and I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah.
My name is...
Okay, go ahead, Alex.
My name is Alex Jang. I'm also from Montgomery Blair. I'm a senior, and I'll be the second speaker in today's debate.
And I am Shari Arvazgami. You can call me Shars as well. I am the third and final speaker for Montgomery Blair.
Hi, I'm Anand Biswas from Johns Creek, or from Ivy Bridge, I guess. And I'm going to be the third speaker today.
All right, hi, I'm Noah Yoon. I'm a sophomore from Ivy Bridge, and I'll be second speaking today.
Hi, I'm Prakar Gupta, and I'm a freshman from Ivy Bridge, and I will be speaking first in today's debate.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. We would like to remind our judges and team members to stay on mute unless you're speaking or preparing to speak. Of course, during the cross-examination, all members of the teams can unmute their lines. Each of you has received a copy of the oral debate format. We will now begin with the opening presentation by the affirmative team.
Before I begin, can I get a quick indication that everyone's ready? Okay. Then my time will begin now. In 2010, 3 London researchers united to teach a computer how to play video games, simple ones like Pong and Space Invaders. The artificial intelligence program quickly learned the rules of the games without any prior knowledge, leading the researchers to wonder whether they could transform it into a general purpose AI that could tackle the world's challenges, both big and small. Over 10 years and 1 Google acquisition later, this AI has learned to identify biomarkers for breast cancer, optimize the use of energy in data systems, and model complex processes like protein folding. DeepMind, an 11-year-old startup creating the most innovative solutions to the world's most perplexing challenges, is what AI is all about. Today, my partners and I are proud to affirm the resolution, the benefits of artificial intelligence outweigh the harms. Our first contention is healthcare. AI systems like DeepMind are improving quality of life worldwide. One of the key benefits of these systems is enabling humans to reach new heights in healthcare. Already, AI is increasing drug development while improving preventative health measures, both of which have the potential to improve health outcomes for billions. COVID-19 highlights the importance of continued medical innovation, but unfortunately, there's a problem in the status quo. A report by Deloitte finds that every 10,000 molecules, only 10 make it to clinical trials, and out of those 10, only 1 even makes it past phase 1 trials. As the law of diminishing return takes its toll, innovation will only decrease as research into new drugs becomes more and more prohibitively expensive. Fortunately, AI is poised to reverse this trend by augmenting existing medical capabilities and creating new ones. AI enables medical researchers to analyze larger data sets in shorter amounts of time, improving the efficiency and efficacy of drug development. That's why a study by Deloitte finds that discovery stages and preclinical investigations are up to 15 times faster when employing AI. Additionally, AI can also create entirely new drugs at superhuman speeds. For example, AI algorithms formulated a completely new drug that treats patients with compulsive disorders in just 12 months. This stands in stark contrast to the standard 5-year drug development process, and luckily, this is going to spread throughout every medical field. As Professor Hopkins put it, the beauty of the algorithm is that it is agnostic, so it can be applied to any disease. Drug development is of utmost importance, as from 1986 to 2000, new drugs were responsible for 40% of the increase in life expectancy globally. Beyond drugs, AI also allows for the detection and treatment of chronic diseases with high precision. For example, AI can already outperform doctors in diagnosing breast cancer. And more importantly, AI is enabling the development of new capabilities to assess risk of developing chronic diseases. Early detection is the most effective way to reduce deaths from chronic diseases, which currently account for 70% of all deaths in the United States and tens of millions annually worldwide. AI's impact in healthcare is a microcosm of its future role in society. The same data analytics technology used to examine medical data can be used to increase the level of autonomy by which a vehicle operates and maintain the safety of global food supplies. All these applications quite simply revolutionize the world as we know it. Our second and final argument is the workforce. One of the largest concerns with AI is its effect on the labor market. And although AI replicates certain human tasks definitionally, this does not translate into unemployment, because humans historically have adapted and provided new roles for themselves in the global economy, included in every single industrial revolution. Indeed, a World Economic Forum report from 2018 finds empirically businesses that employ AI become more productive, allowing them to enhance the output of existing workers rather than replacing them. AI has already been beneficial in a multitude of industries, from design software for engineers to virtual operative assistants for surgeons, and also holds non-specific uses for all businesses and people. Things like grammar checking software, natural language processing, and even virtual assistants like Siri or Cortana. In the past 10 years, the frequency of contributions from machines and algorithms to human-led tasks has increased to over 57%. So what does this mean for the workforce? Well, worker efficiency and output are set to increase drastically. A 2018 analysis by Bain & Company estimates that average worker output will increase by 30% due to automation by 2030, and a McKinsey report concludes that AI specifically will result in a 16% growth in global GDP by 2030, equating to an additional $13 trillion of global economic activity. For these reasons, an international analysis of the impact of automation by John Hawksworth, the chief economist at PwC, concludes that AI and automation will lead to a larger and wealthier global economy and create enough jobs in the long run to offset those lost in the short run. Because AI paves the path towards a better and brighter future, we strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we will have the opening presentation by the negative. 5 minutes.
If everybody's ready and everyone can hear me okay, then my time will begin now. Identified as the fourth industrial revolution by some and Skynet by others, artificial intelligence systems are touted by their creators as technological innovation that corrects human imperfections with decision-making that is faster and more objective. When studied more rigorously, however, evaluation of AI's consequences, both intended and unintended, reveals a less benevolent revolution is underway. We begin our negation of the revolution by accepting the definition of AI provided by the affirmative, as their interpretation would both include narrow and general AI. Next, we advocate the following framework for today's debate. First is who's using AI and how they're using it matters more than the abstract power measurements. No matter how complex, AI machines are still tools, instruments that are created to perform specific functions and or achieve particular goals. A sharp chisel used by a sculptor facilitates beneficial art, but when used by a thief, it facilitates harmful breaking and entering. But then two is that hope is not a strategy. The resolution wording is of a value proposition, not a policy thesis. Thus, we are not debating how AI could idly be used under optimal circumstances, but rather how it is being used in the status quo and most likely will exist in the future. But then three is that you have to think globally, not locally. There is no actor specified in the resolution, nor is it geographically limited. Thus, AI outcomes that advantage already privileged groups while disadvantaging larger, less privileged groups should be recognized as harms, not benefits. We now identify the harms of AI. Contention 1 being exacerbating inequality. as the director of AI, Austin K. Butterfield warns that AI will exacerbate the divides between the developed and developing world and the have and have-nots in our society. First, an Oxford study found that AI will replace half of the labor force. This is uniquely harmful for developing countries, as Auckland research fellow Mark Bartlett finds that developing states disproportionately rely on industries most vulnerable to AI, like manufacturing. Also, new jobs that are created by AI will go to technologically skilled workers in developed economies, only widening the rich and poor gap. But then second is that Sci Innovation Ventures AI Institute President Kai-Fu Lee explains that due to early control of AI patents, most of the money from AI will go to the US and China, which have already amassed the talent, market share, and data. Subsequently, developing nations are forced to negotiate with whichever country supplies their AI software, essentially becoming the country's economic dependent. Finally, the affirmative assumption that AI winners will act benevolently for the common good is naively optimistic. The bias in AI algorithms is a function of privilege generated by the lack of diversity in the industry, not benign ignorance. As science journalist Stephen Burani explained, decisions about which data sets to feed AI machines or whether oversight is necessary are being made by those people with no incentive to change power structures. Yes, AI does empower its creators and owners, but as Berkeley psychology professor Keltner warns, with power, people become impulsive. They eat more resources than is in their fair share. They become more unethical. They also are more likely to become more stereotypical. This flips the affirmative's claims on disability, as the human-centered design researchers Bennett and Keyes argued that conversations around AI and disability risk reinforcing existing power dynamics, either through reinforcing the position of existing medical gatekeepers or promoting tools and techniques that benefit otherwise privileged disabled people, while harming those who are rendered outliers in multiple ways. Technologies putatively intended to help disabled people but fail to consider structural injustices in their design are likely to result in harms not addressed by the fairness of framing of ethics. Contention 2 is China's rise. Sinologist Elsa Kanya knows that China views AI as critical to achieving an advantage in its quest for global power, with multiple harm scenarios. Scenario 1 being authoritarianism. Chinese AI creates a surveillance state, leading to human rights violations and ethnic genocide. Paul Moser reveals that AI developments in facial recognition technology uniquely extends China's ability to label Uyghur Muslims. Moser finds that one city used AI to screen citizens 500,000 times in 1 month. Kate Cronin finds that the CCP utilizes AI to track and detain millions of Uyghurs in camps, a form of cultural genocide. Consequently, over 800,000 Uyghurs are being subjected to invasive medical treatments, cultural indoctrination, and numerous other human rights violations. Moreover, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Benheim finds that China's digital authoritarianism is a global threat to democracy, which is currently being exported to dozens of countries worldwide. But then second is militarized AI. Norman MacDonald, president of the International Council on Security and Development, finds that China has invested extensively in artificial intelligence to rapidly revolutionize military capabilities. Center of East Asia Policy finds studies Ryan Haas predicts an AI arms race between the U.S. and China. In such scenarios, benefits instead generate harms. As a 2020 report on AI weaponization warns that the pursuit of AI technology by great powers will likely compound the destabilization effects of the great power competition. So the privileged strategic benefits of AI-enhanced weapons generate risks to nuclear security and stability, which could be catastrophic. The report also concludes that inherently destabilizing military AI systems are ripe for miscalculations and misperceptions between nuclear armed states and increasing the dangers of escalation and deterrence failure, thus causing a global catastrophe. In conclusion, AI is a tool being used harmfully now and will more likely to be used the same way in the future by selfish actors for malignant purposes. Thus, you have a moral obligation to vote negative.
All right, thank you. We will now have a 3-minute break for teams to confer before the affirmative second speech. Beginning the time now. All right, that is the end of time. We will now proceed with the affirmative second speech, which will be 5 minutes.
All right, is everyone ready? All right, my time begins now. We agree that it is important to consider who is using AI and how AI is being used. However, in this debate, we should not only look at AI's past and present, but also its future. Although AI advancements have increased drastically, it is still relatively new with far more benefits that have yet to be reaped. Just like any technology, AI might be imperfect. However, as algorithms continue to improve, the majority of its drawbacks will cease to exist. And in the long term, AI will revolutionize the world, providing benefits across all areas that will offset short-term harms. One example of this is climate change. To get a glimpse of how AI can help confront climate change, we'll begin with agriculture. The Union of Concerned Scientists names 4 impacts that climate change will have on the world: floods, droughts, crops, and pathogenic threats. AI reduces the unpredictability that arises from these issues. Through obtaining satellite images of weather patterns and views of harvest outputs, AI can optimize farm output while climate change threatens it. In fact, according to the WEF, widespread use of AI-based agricultural methods could reduce farming costs by 100 billion by 2030, all while saving 180 billion cubic meters of water. But the impact of AI goes beyond farms. AI startup Omdena recently developed a system of vector machines to monitor areas of droughts, floods, and violent conflicts resulting from climate change, which helps optimize the allocation of utility personnel. When we look at climate disaster projections, it's clear that a lack of intervention is doomed. The Institute of Economics and Peace explains that 1.2 billion people living in 31 countries are not sufficiently resilient to withstand such ecological threats. Here's why this matters. If you believe that my opponent's arguments about inequality and oppression are important, then you should cast your ballot for the affirmative, because climate change magnifies each of the issues they discuss on a much larger scale. For instance, climate change disproportionately affects the world's most disadvantaged communities because they are the ones that lack the resources to adapt. That's why a comprehensive study finds that nearly 98% of the people seriously affected by climate change come from developing nations. In addition, climate change has also historically increased authoritarianism. One example is the Maldives, one country which is very susceptible to climate change due to its rising sea levels. And as the economy stagnated due to the effects of global warming, its democracy actually buckled and an authoritarian leader ended up taking over the country. And this is just one of many examples of climate change fostering authoritarianism. Finally, climate change decreases crop yields, which also causes conflict. In fact, the UN finds that conflict has increased 5-fold in West Africa, isolating clashes between farmers due to pressure from climate change as a key cause. Now let's go into my opponent's specific arguments, starting with inequality. The notion that developing countries don't benefit from AI is simply short-sighted. Yes, there may be a lack of infrastructure and data. However, countries aren't stagnant. They're constantly developing. For instance, the number of internet users in Africa grew 7 times faster than the global average in the past few years, and AI algorithms and online marketplaces are projected to create 3 million jobs. In addition, AI will also improve educational outcomes. Online courses driven by AI can provide an affordable, precisely targeted education to underprivileged people and underprivileged countries. For example, in India, Upgrad, which is an AI company, has enrolled 2,000 students in entrepreneurship, digital marketing, data analytics, and project management courses. And by leveraging these educational opportunities spurred by AI, low-income individuals across the world can gain the skills needed to keep up with the new jobs created by AI in the long term. Finally, my opponents mentioned this issue about power imbalances and disabilities. We never mentioned this disabilities point. And furthermore, my opponents never prove how they can actually dismantle these power imbalances. In either world, power imbalances will exist, but the only way to truly help these marginalized communities is through AI. Now let's go into my opponent's second main argument about surveillance. His argument is going to be written in the past because the use of AI for harmful surveillance will only decrease in the long term. Just a few weeks ago, Politico released a draft of legislation from the EU that will ban certain uses of high-risk artificial intelligence while limiting others if they don't meet a block of standards. In fact, new European regulations will have global consequences that can cause change in China. The EU's proposed rules will restrict or ban some uses of AI within its borders, including by tech giants in China. This is effectively an economic sanction designed by the EU against China, and in time, major Chinese companies like ByteDance will feel the pressure to limit their contributions to the CCP's harmful development of AI. So in the long term, international organizations will solve for this problem and it will go away. Finally, my opponents mentioned this argument about conflict. However, well-established militaries like one in the US and China will certainly not use flawed AI algorithms in something as high stakes as conflict. Fail-safe mechanisms will be established to prevent any adverse consequences or miscalculations, and any faulty errors would be thoroughly tested and revised before being deployed in the real world. Therefore, all of my opponents' speculation about nuclear attacks increasing simply falls apart because before AI is actually deployed, researchers, scientists will investigate it thoroughly to make sure that there's no faulty errors with it, which is why AI has been so successful in the status quo. For these reasons, please vote for the probe team.
All right, thank you. We will now have the 3-minute break for teams to confer before the negative second speech. Beginning now. All right, that is the end of the 3 minutes. We will now proceed with the negative second speech, which will be 5 minutes long.
All right, if everyone is ready, my time begins now. Humans are not good people. The only thing that is not responded to in the last speech you heard is that even when humans gain more power, then they use that power for more stereotypes, which is why Berkeley psychology professor Keltner explained in 2016 that when high-powered people when humans are have this balance of impulse and our ego, our sense of morality, and our sense of what other people think of us, and our power shifts this balance. Power leads people to feel entitled to take more resources. This is critical because it means that all of our arguments are more probable than theirs, because it's more likely that people are going to be using AI for more harmful purposes than for more good purposes. But let's talk about their first argument about climate change. There's a ton of big problems with this. Firstly, all of their evidence is speculative that AI might decrease carbon emissions by 120 billion in the future. But according to Rob Tay's, current AI models are using 300,000 times more energy in their projects, which includes fossil fuels, which is significantly worse off. But secondly, they say that we're going to be improving things such as farm surveillance. But according to Sidney Young of the Harvard International Review, many of these small farms will not be able to get access to this type of AI technology, which means that it'll go to large farms. This is really bad because Kate Good concludes that AI worsens climate change by empowering these large farms. Industrial agriculture uses a lot of fossil fuels, which is responsible for 1/3 of all global greenhouse emissions. But let's talk about our first argument about inequality. They give a couple of responses. First, they say that we explain that AI causes large labor displacement in the developing world, eliminating over 50% of all jobs. Moreover, AI also causes global inequality because the US and China already have all of the AI, making other countries economically dependent on them to be able to compete. They say that countries are always developing and that we're going to be creating 3 million jobs. But the jobs that they are creating, as they tell you in their own case, are things like engineers and like surgeons. But those are all high skill jobs. We're talking about low skill jobs like manufacturing going away, which obviously can't become like an engineer afterwards. Then they say that educational outcomes are happening. But they have missed the nuance of our argument that developing countries specifically do not have this type of energy and infrastructure to have this type of job retraining happen. They say that we don't dismantle power imbalances. That is not our argument. Our argument is that when the US and China are exponentially growing because of AI, they have all the power in the world and cause all other countries to be dependent on them. Let's talk about our next argument about authoritarianism. They say that it'll decrease in the long term because the EU is banning. But look at history. According to Dr. Diego Lopez da Silva, historically authoritarianism has only increased alongside AI. Even if the EU is increasing regulation, China is still increasing at the same time as AI. The correlation is on our side. Let's talk about our final argument of militarization. They say that people aren't going to use this isn't going to be reliable. But again, look at history. After the Industrial Revolution, we saw increased imperialism and increased expansion, which fueled the expansion of 2 more world wars. And if you just bring in things like nuclear weapons into the mix, as is in the status quo, then that's just fueling a lot more global arms racing that could lead to nuclear war. Moreover, our argument is about perceptual. It doesn't matter if the US and China think that they're going to attack each other, they're going to preemptively strike. Let's talk about their arguments, however. Beginning with their first argument about innovation. Firstly, according to Professors Carroll, Lexton, and Lai, most of them agree that most pharmaceutical companies are more focused on profit. Even if that innovation becomes faster, companies that are just still going to increase the price of drugs because they're greedy big pharma companies, which will never provide good innovation to the people. But secondly, according to Professor Sawaya, the majority of innovation AI is being used to create things like biological weapons that terrorists are going to use to kill millions of people, which is also a lot worse because it means that there's significant, which is also links into our framing because again, people are not good. Let's talk about, but secondly, they say that we increase earlier diagnosis, but according to the human-centered design researchers Bennett and Keys in 2019, this isn't a good thing. For example, when we have earlier detection, it allows parents to see when their children are going to be going to have disease like autism, which causes millions of children to be murdered through mercy killings, which is on net a bad thing. Let's talk about their last argument about inequality. There's a couple of problems with this. Number one, they say that humans can get other jobs, but according to Abhinav Suri of UPenn, AI is doing other things that were thought to only be done by humans, such as creating new songs, which means that AI is actually going to take away a lot more jobs than they think. But secondly, this is empirically, our side is empirically more verified than theirs, because according to Goyal and Aneja 20, the Gini coefficient in developing nations with less AI is lower than those in developed nations, which means that obviously inequality is a lot higher in developed nations, proving that AI is often worse off. But lastly, look at history. According to Walsh 20 of the HBR, every single recession that's followed the automation has been followed by a jobless recovery, not one with jobs because of this automation. Thank you. Please vote neg.
All right, that has concluded the second speeches by each team. We will now move into the cross-examination period. IPBF has dedicated 10 minutes for questions and balance time between the teams. For both teams, please make sure each team member must ask and answer one question. I will be keeping count. Both questions and answers may not be longer than 1 minute. Let's start with a question from the affirmative to the negative.
All right. So you tell me at the top of your case that humans are inherently bad and they'll take every single possible instance of AI and turn it to something harmful. So if your argument were really true that people and organizations are going to use AI to cause nuclear attacks, biological attacks, and all of these harmful things, why haven't we seen these nuclear attacks, these biological attacks actually happen in the status quo?
Okay, so again, in like your own rebuttal, you say that AI is still developing right now. The algorithms are getting to the point where they're going to be really good. So we say that by that logic, even if these things aren't happening right now, they're going to happen in the future. But also, we do have harms that are happening currently, such as we say that China surveilled 800,000 people with their artificial intelligence, as well as like the US and China are already causing dependence with their artificial intelligence.
All right. My question regards, or can I ask a question? Sorry for the moderator. All right, cool. My question regards the effects of AI on the economy. In response to our argument that AI displaces tens of millions of workers in low-skilled, repetitive task jobs, you attempt to diminish the scope of harm by noting that previous industrial revolutions caused economic chaos and society survived with more net jobs after the dust had settled. But given that during the Industrial Revolution of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, humanity suffered through 2 world wars that killed nearly 100 million people without the use of nuclear weapons that now exist in multiple hotspots, the empirics raise legitimate doubts about whether humanity will be able to muddle through the economic chaos caused by AI. What evidence do you have that the 21st century will be able to better handle what the 20th century was barely able to?
Yeah, so I can take this question. I think the biggest issue that we had with your rebuttal is it didn't really respond to the internal warranting of what we're talking about, right? The reason why we say that AI is unique is because, first of all, right, that things related to conflict, for example, that isn't going to happen with AI, because we know that empirically, even though AI has been implemented into a nuclear system for decades now, there hasn't been any conflict, right? The second thing is you tell me that when the dust settles, things are better. That's exactly our point. Every single time we've had an industrial revolution, we've seen huge amounts of economic development. I can guarantee to you that you prefer the world that you have today over one that we would have seen centuries ago, where no one had access to what we would consider now as basic necessities. Things like access to running water and plumbing that are a result of increased economic development throughout all these countries. Moderator, can I ask a question now?
Yes.
Cool. So in preparation for this debate, we looked over some of your sources, and one of the biggest issues that we saw with the Sawaya's evidence, which is the one you use for biological warfare, is that at the end, it concludes 2 things. The first thing is this idea that, one, they tell you that technological innovation in AI should not be mitigated and not be stopped because on net, the benefits are better than the harms. But the second issue is that Sawaya comes from a cybersecurity a cybersecurity company. And his entire paper is about why cybersecurity needs to be bolstered, because otherwise countries can steal information and use AI to develop bioweapons. So how does this conflict of interest affect the strength of your argument, and why exactly are you citing someone with these kinds of credentials?
Yeah, I'll answer this. So you have to understand that the resolution asked by the IPPF operates in a fundamentally different world or scope than the real world. There is no world in which AI development cannot exist. Technological development is inevitable. AI development is also inevitable. So that's why, if you look at the context of the author that we cite, it says that we need to continue to promote AI development in ways that are good, and we need to impose important regulatory frameworks. However, we isolate his arguments on biological terrorism because we would argue that in a world in which you can outright reject the technology that is artificial intelligence, we would argue that is a better alternative than risking things like biological warfare. And when you link that back to our framework, we prove to you that humanity is fundamentally bad. We are not benevolent actors. We always use AI to do bad things, and those risks unequivocally outweigh the benefits.
Okay, I'll ask a question now. So let's say that both your arguments on climate change and our arguments on climate change are both equally true. So 50% of AI uses renewables, and like the other 50% use like fossil fuels. So given that like things like renewable energy don't decrease emissions, they just make sure that we're not using more emissions, then how is that a net positive for you if fossil fuels actually increase like global emissions at the same time?
Yeah, so we disagree with your argument that AI will contribute to climate change on a large scale. because as the demand for AI and data increases, so too will the ability to store data more efficiently, which will require less emissions in the long term. So one example of this is quantum computing. And through quantum computing, we can store data and run models much more quickly, which decreases the amount of emissions that need to be spent for training a model. In addition, AI is also becoming more carbon efficient because AI is actually making itself more efficient, right? Similar to how AI can make power grids more efficient, AI can make itself more efficient. And one example of this is DeepMind, which has actually reduced energy for cooling Google data centers by up to 40% by optimizing through optimization tactics.
Yeah, if I could quickly add as well, our argument isn't that some AIs use things like green tech or green energy to be able to power themselves. It's rather that the implementation of AI allows for better green practices in all sectors of the economy.
Yes, to touch up upon that, just to finish it off, AI, when partnered with any form of energy company, can do two things. One, it can increase the ways that we look at renewable energy, make us find new ways to optimize solar panels, make them less intermittent. And secondly, it can lower our demand on fossil fuels. One, by reducing the supply and optimizing the ways we find them and making waste go away. And two, by showing us the ways that we can optimize the electric grid so people aren't using energy as much. But I'm going to go on to my question, which is the fact that in your framework, you spend a lot of time talking about how we need to learn about what AI is being used for, not what hypothetically AI can be used as. And yet you make this great point, you make this very long point that we don't agree with, that AI can be used in dangerous ways with the workforce, that it could potentially lead to different problems. But we've seen that, for example, especially in developing countries, which need inequality reduction the most, AI has been used to supplement the output of workers. For example, AI has been used throughout the pandemic for teachers to make their jobs easier, to make them access their students across the pandemic, all while McKinsey reports that teachers are not going to be automated over the next 10 years. They're actually going to be grown. Their jobs are going to be grown by 5 to 24%. If AI is able to supplement the work of workers without replacing them, then in what ways is that hurting the economy?
Yeah, I think that yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I'm supposed to answer your question. Okay, so I'll take this, and you go. So our evidence is really both of our evidence are really contradictory on this point, right? Because we tell you that overarchingly, once AI is actually established in these developing countries, all you're going to be actually doing is just eliminating half of the labor force, right? Because what AI does in the near future, even in the short term or even in the long term, is replace these small scaled jobs or these low scale jobs, right? Which are manufacturing, which most of the developing world is actually based on manufacturing skills. So you go ahead and tell me, oh, teachers are not going to be replaced in a very short term or in the 10 years, right? But when we're not talking about specific scenarios, right? We're telling you low skill jobs specifically. Every low skill job like manufacturing is going to be replaced in the developing world by AI. That's what we said. That's what our evidence says in constructive, as well as rebuttal.
I just want to add on two things. First of all, you guys made an argument that said that AI would be used to create more personalized education and more personalized learning scenarios. Your own evidence agrees with us that AI is going to be automating all sorts of jobs away. But then secondly, your evidence and your argument sounds really good, but in reality, it isn't. Sure, there might be some sectors where AI can augment and improve productivity, but when you look at it holistically, in these developing countries, you have millions of people working in low-skilled, manufacturing sectors, and AI is going to automate away those mundane, very repetitive tasks. We haven't really seen a sufficient refutation to that this entire round.
I'll go ahead and ask a question. Can I go ahead and ask the question from the moderator? Okay. So my question pertains to you telling me that countries don't want to strike each other because AI is way too risky in the status quo and even in the long term in the military. But according to Forrest Morgan from Rand, leaders when they actually get AI are not sure of its capabilities and are overconfident of the technology, causing miscalculation and causing a global catastrophe. Right? If this is not true, what evidence do you have to counter these pieces of evidence that clearly postdates us on this point?
Yeah. So I can take this. So at the end of the day, this whole idea is based off of a couple assumptions. The first one is that AI is a black box. The biggest issue with this assumption is that it's historically not true. The algorithms and the things that essentially power AI, they are understood and essentially reducing them down to this idea that there are a bunch of arbitrary equations that don't have any significance is very, very demeaning to the people who do research into this division. But the second and most important thing is what goes unresponded to earlier, which is that historically, AI has been made part of things like nuclear detection technology. All of these things have been implemented for decades now. The fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, the United States isn't over-relying on this technology. It has been developing on it for decades. It has fail-safe measures to make sure it doesn't over-rely on it. And because of that, we tell you empirics prove otherwise. And it's very clear that AI isn't going to cause things like a nuclear war.
All right, that is the end of the cross-examination between the debaters. We will now move on to questions from the judges. So the questions can be at any length, judges. The answers, however, may not be longer than 1 minute. I will direct 5 questions to each side. We will begin with the affirmative. After each side has asked and answered 5 questions, I will allow questioning to continue while balancing questions between each side. The questioning period should not exceed 20 minutes. And so again, judges, I'm not going to select a specific judge. I'm sure that you have questions of your own, but we will begin with questions for the affirmative side and then move on to the negative after 5 questions have been asked. Beginning now. Yes, go ahead, Judge Aiden.
Yeah, so I remember from the affirmative side that you mentioning that the negative did not fulfill its burden of proof in proving that things would go badly with AI. So I'm wondering, what do you consider the burden of proof of affirmative to show that overall AI is better as a concept than it is worse? Because I haven't quite figured out from you what your burden of proof is to win.
Yeah, so I think the burden of proof falls into 2 different categories. One is if we can show that AI has been used or is currently being used in order to fulfill a particular task that can help humans better increase economic output or fulfill government or military tasks. The second one is whether we can show that research is being done to improve that AI that already exists, or that research is being done to show whether AI can be applied to any of these sectors in order to make that possible. A lot of our research, a lot of our background comes from DeepMinds, the AI that we mentioned in the intro of our case. We showed that they designed a machine that gives doctors a 48-hour head start of identifying life-threatening kidney diseases. My opponents offered this idea that we'll respond to, I guess, in our last case, that early treatment isn't a good thing. We've also shown, the ways that small companies can do this. We can even talk more about how Helix is using AI to assist in the development of up to 4,000 FDA-registered drugs. So all in all, it comes down to what AI has done and what it can be shown to do by research.
Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you. I've got a bit of background noise, so I apologize for that. But I guess the question that I'd ask is that it's clear that the negative side is pursuing this idea about humans being bad, and it seems like a pretty important issue during the round. So do you subscribe to that notion, or do you believe that, I guess, the good in humans and the relevance to that when it comes to artificial intelligence outweighs the bad?
Is this to the affirmative?
Yes, we're still going with the affirmative.
All right, so to clarify, I guess we don't agree with this idea that on net humans are bad, because I think the entire idea that you can essentially prescribe all humans to this same notion of them all being negative is really, really harmful and isn't very productive. But at the end of the day, the reason that all of our arguments kind of bypass this in some way is that at the end of the day, even if people pursue things like greed, the core thesis behind things like capitalism is the invisible hand, right? The idea is that these people, even when pursuing things like their individual success, end up helping others, right? And we believe the same thing applies to AI. The creation of new technologies and industrial revolutions in the past have been people like, for example, Henry Ford trying to create a better way to make cars so he could make more money. At the end of the day, this created accessibility for millions and millions of people to be able to travel anywhere they need to go, right? So the idea behind our case is that, first of all, humans are not evil, because that is a really, really bad notion to have, because at the end of the day, we're both arguing to save lives and do similar things like that. So if humans are on net bad, there's no point to do that. But the second thing is that even if humans were bad, we're creating incentives that allow them to be good to each other.
I'm going to ask the negative to also pay attention to this question, because I'm probably going to turn this around and ask the same question of you when it becomes your turn. One of the big contentions seems to be with the workforce and the role that the AI is playing in how we perform our work and what we do. The affirmative wants to tell us that a lot of these tasks are going to be replicated, and doing those kinds of things, but it's actually going to help with the efficiency of work, right? I mean, that's pretty much your argument. On the other side, they're telling us that AI is actually going to replace a number of workers, is going to create a whole lot of unemployment, especially in some of these lesser developed countries where manufacturing jobs are there and everything. How am I to resolve that as the judge? And obviously when it gets to the negative, I'm going to give you the opportunity to answer that same question. So be thinking about that when we get there. Okay. So I guess the affirmative, help me out with that one.
Yeah, of course. So I think that the key for every single judge here is to look at how AI will impact the world in the long term. So we've seen with previous industrial revolutions, previous inventions, that there are always jobs that they're going to be displaced. For example, the invention of personal computers destroyed 3.5 million jobs, but in the long term, it created 19 million more jobs related to the computer industry. For example, information technology, hardware engineers, software engineers, etc. And the same will be the case for artificial intelligence. And in fact, our evidence finds that although there might be losses of up to 70 million jobs in the short term, in the long term, AI, by improving efficiency and helping businesses expand, are able to produce more output. And when they have more output, more money, they then have to hire more workers in order to keep up with growing demand. And I get that there are concerns that developing nations won't be able to sustain these jobs, but they failed to neglect 2 points here. The first point is that these developing nations are developing. They're not just stagnant. They're going to be continuing to develop their economies. They're going to have more resources, more education, etc., until they get to a point where the people have access to high quality educations, and that will in turn enable them to secure these higher paying jobs. And the process is not going to be like AI just thrown in there just at once. It's gradual development. So as AI continues to advance and countries continue to advance with it, then more people will have access to higher quality educations, more resources that will allow them to get more jobs. And in fact, AI is actually assisting with that through precisely targeted education, through training out algorithms, as we mentioned in the rebuttal speech. One example is Upgrad.
If I could add something really, really quickly, I think the most important thing, again, is that even when you compare things like the reasoning behind our arguments, at the end of the day, the affirmative is the one with the empirics to back it, right? All of their arguments are based off of hypotheticals. They're all projections of how many jobs are lost. We are telling you the examples in the status quo and empirical analyses of this status quo that tell you that right now worker production is increasing and we're not seeing the replacement of workers. But the second thing is that even if all these things happen, the worst case scenario, which is that all these jobs are replaced, again, our evidence indicates that in every single industrial revolution, the eventual diffusion of technology happens regardless, right? So even if there's initial inequality, right, the AI eventually reaches these developing countries, and we have seen it reach these developing countries already, right? A bunch of countries in Africa have invested into algorithms, into things like high-tech cryptocurrency. It's allowed them to leapfrog their development, and we're telling you that's on net a positive.
Thank you.
All right, we get 2 more questions, or at least one more. That would be great from the judges. Thank you.
I'm all set. Okay, great. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the status quo. That's another confusion I have. So you mentioned the Industrial Revolution, which I'm not quite sure how it interacts with the negative, because if you look at the Industrial Revolution, you have the empires being industrial, but you don't hear as much about the rest of the world. So I guess my question is, considering the legal precedent, the legal status quo we have of who has the patents over the AI, do you see a path forward for developing countries, a clear-cut path forward for developing countries to develop their AI along with developed countries?
Absolutely. And that's a great question. There are many reasons why AI will be more accessible to developing countries than products of the past industrial revolutions were to developing countries. Firstly, AI is principally a software component. It's something that can be built by code. Actually, in fact, 2 of the 3 members of our team have done AI research in the past. And one thing that we noticed while we were doing our AI research was a lot of the people that we communicated with were from foreign countries, particularly in India and South Asia. The reason why they're able to actually access this information is because of the second reason why AI is accessible for them, which is mass communication, a new feature of the global world order that wasn't able to impact the first industrial revolution. So taken together, these 2 things show why AI can be used to supplement the work of the labor force, to address shortages with maybe teachers or doctors, and to make all around the developing world more developed.
All right, we have one more question from Judge Joshua.
So going back to the point about how there's increased productivity, if this productivity is really skyrocketing and perhaps even exceeds the demand for it, how can you still argue that there's going to be still increased jobs for people who might be in developing nations?
Yeah, so I think this is a really great question, and we actually wanted to touch on this earlier, right? So I think the economic theory behind this is just that aggregate demand increases when production increases, right? So historically, for example, when we've had previous industrial revolutions, demand has increased, right? Previously, people didn't want things like TVs and things like radios because they didn't exist, right? But when you increase the amount of production and you enable things like increased production of luxury goods or even like other commodities, right? People end up demanding them, which is why historically, even though obviously we don't need all the food that we produce, we don't need all these like electronics that we produce, people end up demanding them, which is why there's so many booming sectors. And we're telling you that the same thing is going to happen with AI. Even though productivity increases, right, we see demand increase alongside it. And we also have a bunch of statistics to back this up. And I believe we can cite a few of these in our final speech if you would like, but we do have a lot of evidence that states that demand has historically been increasing along with AI's increase in productivity.
All right, thank you. But now we'll move on to questions for the negative. If there's any more questions for the affirmative, if we have time, we will come back to those. But now if we could begin by judges asking questions of the negative. Thank you.
Let me go ahead and I'll just jump in right. I asked the question earlier about the displacement and those kinds of things. I think Joshua and Aiden have both touched on this and everything. And I kind of want to turn it over to you. Which of these scenarios, I guess, when we talk about the affirmative again, talking about, the replication, but not necessarily the displacement, those kinds of things. You want to argue that in developing countries, those workers will be displaced. Why should I believe your scenario as opposed to theirs? I guess let's turn that question and allow you to answer that question.
Okay, so there's a couple of reasons why I think we should prioritize our scenario. So the first one is the Walsh 20 evidence that we read at the very end of my rebuttal that says that since the 1990s, every single recession and economic shock has been followed by a jobless recovery, specifically because automation is replacing all of these jobs in the long term. And so that empirically proves it. The second reason why is because the jobs that they talk about, there's no predictability as to if these jobs are going to exist, because the Abhinav-Suri evidence also says that AI is now doing things that used to only be thought to be done by humans alone, like composing music, for example, and that almost every job is also at risk of being taken away. And then the last thing I think is the Goyle and Aneja 20 evidence that says that because these developed nations have significantly more AI, they're the AI hubs of the world compared to these developing nations that just get AI donated to them. Gini coefficients in developing nations they have less inequality in developing nations now than developed nations, specifically because of this AI. Yeah.
I want to add on to what he's saying. So on top of the insurmountable empirics on how artificial intelligence is already increasing inequality, let's take a closer look at some of the warrants. First of all, everything that the affirmative talks about, they completely miss the specificity of it. We talk about manufacturing, low-level, automated jobs that are going to be replaced by artificial intelligence. Notice how the affirmative never gives a specific example of how AI is going to create jobs for low-skilled workers. The evidence that they introduce in their case is about engineers and it's about nurses. And sure, they have evidence about augmenting the workforce in education. But again, they have never fundamentally answered our question about how millions of people worldwide in developing countries heavily rely on manufacturing jobs. There is no evidence that the artificial intelligence is going to be able to create new jobs that these low-skilled workers are going to be able to go to. But then secondly, artificial intelligence is fundamentally distinct from past industrial revolutions. AI has the capability of being sentient and it can learn on its own. It can also process data at huge levels. And again, unlike computers and unlike the industrial revolution, it's able to automate away low-level, unskilled, specialized jobs at an unprecedented level. Until they give us very specific evidence on how the industrial revolution, both empirically, has created jobs for the poorest of the poor around the world, you always prefer our arguments on inequality.
All right, go ahead, Judge Joshua, and then we'll go to Judge Aiden.
So earlier, the affirmative answered a question by explaining that artificial intelligence is rather accessible because it's all about the code. Now, during your opening, you talked about how AI patents were predominantly owned by companies in China and the United States. But do you think that international patent law truly has the teeth to stop the development of AI in developing countries?
Okay, so I can take this one. So our essential argument is that when the US and China already have all the technology, they have all the labor for this AI development. So even if like international patent laws are in place to prevent the US and China from outcompeting everyone else, the fact of the matter is that the US and China are both power hungry countries that want to have like the greatest economies in the world, for example, which is why those countries are specifically the ones that are going to be developing most of the AI, which is like empirically being seen in the status quo. But then even on top of that, the majority of AI in that from our argument that these like developing countries are getting are from the US and China, which means that those like again, these types of AI, the US isn't going to like send like an iPhone 12 to these developing countries because that's not their best technology. They don't want these countries to like outcompete them because they're always like power hungry countries in general.
I want to add to what, just really quickly, I want to add to what Noah said. The important thing to remember about artificial intelligence is because it's so revolutionary and it has all of the transformative impacts that the affirmative talks about, it's also really, really hard to develop. You need tons of education, you need tons of infrastructure, and we would argue that those things simply don't exist in developing countries. And again, going back to what Noah said, insofar as all of this development is being spurred in top-level countries like the US and China, that leads to these global asymmetries that, again, Noah explains that are happening empirically.
All right, the question from Judge Aiden.
Yeah, so I want to go to the economic side for a second. In the first speech, the affirmative mentions evidence of simply how vaccines that are just, or they're just like medications that would otherwise be ignored due to the lack of knowledge power can now be created because of the realm of AI. So considering, and they also mention a GDP statistic about basically the resources that would exist because of a faster rate of processing other resources. Do you have any reason to believe that companies, and then you responded by saying that companies will not, that basically people who are low skill will be kicked out because of this process. Do you have any reason to believe that companies won't just fund vocational training for people to do more specialized knowledge jobs because they have more resources available?
Prakar, if you want to go take that.
Yeah, okay, so I'll go ahead and take this. So what we tell you is that AI will specifically focus on these low skilled labor jobs, right? Like manufacturing. But what also happens is that sure, like companies might try to actually fund these fund these workshops for these workers to like learn like higher skilled jobs, but that's inherently like not possible. As in like a lot of these workers are like middle aged at this point, so they can't actually learn like completely new like technologies, right? That are like AI in the developing world. They just simply didn't have the education to begin with from their schooling days, right? So if they can actually learn that, then they inherently get displaced, thus causing 50% of the labor market, that is the manufacturing market internationally, to be completely displaced and be unemployed.
I want to quickly add to what Prakar said. I don't know if any of you guys are on Twitter, but if you remember from way back, like one of the things that was trending about like truckers learning how to code, I think this is effectively the same thing Prakar is talking about. It's not easy. I also think it's really ableist and sort of pretentious to tell people that like you got to leave your job and you have to get higher skill jobs. It's just something that's not effective, and it's something that empirically has never happened. And at the same time, we would argue that even if they're right, that in the long term, they solve back for all of these inequities, they totally miss the temporal aspect of our argument. Let's look at the Industrial Revolution. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, there was more militarism, and there was more imperialism, and there was more economic opportunities and wealth for empires. As a result of this economic chaos and all of these other aforementioned factors, those largely sparked the World War I and World War II. We would argue in the same way that artificial intelligence creates all of these global economic collapses, will replace 50% of the workforce in the immediate short term. All of this economic crisis, coupled with increased aggression from the US and China, and the fact that we now have nuclear weapons, risks global existential conflict scenarios, which pretty much isn't answered on the time frame level.
All right, I believe we have time for 2 more questions. So if we want to go to Judge David and then Judge Joshua, and that'll be it. Thank you.
All right, let's start with this framework that the negative is pretty much the one that gives us this framework that says that we need to look at who is using it, how the AI is being used is much more important than this abstract thing that we're looking at. You want us to look at specifically the exacerbation of the inequalities and also the China, the China threat and everything. On the affirmative side, we have healthcare, and the innovations that happen with healthcare because of AI. We also have an increase in the workforce, and they also answer back with the climate change argument that they're making that is overarching and pretty much impacts even those living in the developed world or the developing world, like you talk about and everything. So why do you meet your framework better than they do?
Okay, so yeah, I can take this one. So basically, the essence of our framework is, again, that we should be looking at which actors are using this artificial intelligence. And again, what we say throughout the entire theme of this debate is that humans are not good people. The majority of people do not want the vast majority of people to benefit. They look for short-term profits for themselves, which is why, for example, when people I guess for the example of innovation, big pharma companies the majority of the time aren't trying to create good innovations. They're trying to do things like maximize the amount of profits that they're having, which is why even when they have a breakthrough drug, for example, they put it at the highest price possible to make the most amount of profit, which is why in the majority of the time, the overarching framework that humans are bad people and we should be looking at the actors using artificial intelligence so that on net, the harms through artificial intelligence are a lot more probable than the benefits that they talk about.
I also want to sorry, Prakash, let me go ahead. I want to give a really big empirical example because I think it's super important now that the coronavirus is going on. If you look at India right now, they have terrible coronavirus crisis, tons of deaths, their healthcare system is collapsing. And a huge part of that is because the US is hoarding vaccines. Companies aren't giving out vaccines. This fundamentally answers their arguments on healthcare. There are deep asymmetries and deep inequities that are deeply entrenched in all of their arguments on healthcare. Even if they're right that there are going to be absolute increases in innovation, those benefits are not equitably distributed. And as such, humanity is fundamentally bad, and you should negate for inequality arguments.
Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, yes, we can put it in.
All right. So perhaps I'm misconstruing your argument here, but you seem pretty steadfast in this idea that industrialization was bad in the first place, and then thus so too will be artificial intelligence. So my question is, if you believe that industrialization was bad and should not have happened, what is, I guess, the optimal apogee for societal innovation that you see in the negative world?
I disagree. I never said that the harms of industrialization didn't outweigh the benefits. However, they pretty much dropped all of our arguments about how the Industrial Revolution led to World War I and led to World War II. The critical distinction that we made is that during the status quo, we now have nuclear weapons. And with the result of artificial intelligence, we're also seeing the blurring of mutually assured destruction and other deterrence policies. So we would argue that all of the economic chaos and all of the conflict generated as a result of artificial intelligence, we will simply not be able to withstand that, and there will be no long term. And the second argument that I want to make is the thing about the Industrial Revolution is, and our opponents said this themselves, yeah, it destroyed a lot of jobs in the short term, but it also created a ton of jobs. There's frictional unemployment in agriculture, and it created a ton of industry jobs. They haven't provided, or they haven't reciprocated that same specificity for artificial intelligence. They haven't really given us a single example of low-skilled jobs or really ways that that the underprivileged are benefiting as a result of artificial intelligence. So to answer your question, it's hard to gauge what's the optimal way of going forward, but we would argue that AI needs to be rejected and pretty much maintaining what we have in the quo is probably the best step forward.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Now we will move on to the last part of the debate, the rebuttal statements. We'll begin by the negative with 5 minutes, and then after that will be the affirmative with 5 minutes, concluding the debate. So negative, you have 5 minutes to make your rebuttal speech.
All right. Our opponent said that AI is the most revolutionary innovation in human history, and we don't dispute this. In fact, that's all the more reason why you have to negate in today's round. Our opponents mistakenly envision humanity as Steve Rogers, pure of heart and with the best of intentions. They argue that if we just had the super soldier serum that is AI, we would solve all of the world's problems. But history shows that humanity is no Steve Rogers. AI, at its worst, humanity is the Red Skull, eager to weaponize AI and conquer the world. But even a more optimistic appraisal of human history reveals that we are less like Steve Rogers and more like John Walker, who by taking the super soldier serum became stronger and faster, but not better. No matter how well-intentioned he may have been, his efforts to save the world only increased exploitation and exacerbated harms. The lesson is clear. Only until we address our flaws, our selfishness, our vengefulness, our vanity, can the benefits of artificial intelligence outweigh the harms. We have not yet had such a reckoning, and therefore you must vote for the negative. Let's start with the inequality argument. AI is a perpetrator of global inequality insofar as developing countries are disproportionately reliant on industries like manufacturing that are vulnerable to the disruptiveness of AI. Understand that all of their arguments about how AI creates jobs are only in high-level sectors. They have not provided at this point a single piece of evidence on how AI helps or creates low-skilled jobs. Also, the bulk of the money and profit generated by AI will go to countries such as the US or China, which fosters economic and technological dependence in developing nations, further deepening global inequality. Finally, per our framework, the notion that those in power will use technology benevolently is a deeply flawed premise. AI will deepen longstanding inequities, and its black box nature will only make it fundamentally more difficult to address these asymmetries in the future. Also, you can extend the dropped Keller evidence, which says that with power, people become impulsive. They eat more resources than is their fair share. They become more unethical. They are more likely to stereotype, perfectly encapsulating the arguments of the negative. I want to give you an analogy. Imagine a race that's being run with 10 competitors. The winners who finish within a certain time limit will be rewarded with better housing, better food, better leisure opportunities, and overall better quality of life. Now imagine that before the race began, 4 of the runners were given the latest track shoes proven to increase speed and given a steroid shot proven to boost stamina. Well, those 4 finished before everyone else, but we wouldn't consider that a net positive because, well, at least some people got access to better food and shelter. No, we would rightly recognize that's an injustice and an overall harm. That's what the affirmative team is trying to deceive you into thinking, that as long as some people benefit that wouldn't have benefited without AI, it's a net positive. Our claims on inequality are reminding you that there is more to the world than profit. With that, let's look at the oppression argument. China is able to use AI to create a more oppressive surveillance state. Facial recognition AI has already enabled China to create concentration camps. Our evidence explicitly concludes that the emergence of artificial intelligence enables surveillance and oppression at a much deeper foundational level than was possible by the Soviet Union 70 years ago. Specifically, in just one district, over the course of 1 month, the AI software was used by police over 500,000 times. This technology stores the faces of Uyghurs who leave Xinjiang and a national database, making it virtually impossible to escape the tyranny and the government to detain millions of Uyghur Muslims and place them in concentration camps. Even more troubling, China has spread this technology globally, posing an imminent and existential threat to democracy. Ultimately, it's clear that AI has tangibly and quantitatively widened the scope and magnitude of oppression, hastening wide-scale cultural genocide. Quickly, I want to respond to the arguments on climate change. You can extend the term that Noah made that said that as a result of inequality and a symmetrical distribution of the benefits of AI, factory farms will benefit more. As a result of the increase in factory farms and industrial farming, there's actually a net increase in climate change. But even if you don't buy that, climate change is too long-term of an impact. They're not going to be able to withstand the short-term consequences of artificial intelligence. On the China scenario, we talk about how increased aggression and increased arms race and economic chaos perpetuated by AI will lead to global existential conflicts. They drop all of our analysis on the Industrial Revolution, how increased militarism and increased expansion and increased economic chaos led to 2 of the greatest world wars. Humanity is bad, negate.
All right, now we will move on to the affirmative's 5-minute rebuttal statement.
Does everybody hear me well? All right, with that, I'll begin my time right now. Humans are not bad. Humans seek to fulfill their own interests and the interests of others. Those humans who we trust to make decisions related to artificial intelligence are the ones who make the best decisions on our behalf. Those people, whether in industry or government or research, are both competent and well-intentioned. With that being said, our first contention surrounds healthcare. My partners show that artificial intelligence provides novel solutions to healthcare. These include drug discovery, streamlined innovation, and the delivery of medicine to patients. My opponents respond to this by saying that it doesn't matter because pharmaceutical companies simply care about profits, not about innovation. Well, the reason why they prioritize profits, often copycatting currently existing drugs, is because of the long timeline that it takes to take a new drug idea, turn it into a new drug, test it, and then make it available on the shelf or in pharmacies. This entire process is completely streamlined by artificial intelligence because pharmacy workers, with the assistance of AI, will be able to look at how drugs can impact different people so that not only will they know who to give it to, but how much to give. In addition to that, while drugs are being tested, they can be given to more people because data from AI allows AI to comprehend much more information than we have at once. My opponents also give this argument about bioweapons, saying that if we can believe that AI will expand healthcare, we should also believe that it will expand bioweapons. First of all, they provide no evidence that it has already been done, which is controversial because their own framework prioritizes empirics. With that being said, their evidence for bioweapons also showed the fact that genetic data should not be turned away, that genetic data should be used, and that artificial intelligence is, on a whole, a good thing. They say that early detection is bad because it will lead to abortions. Now, I don't want to go too deep into this argument because of the ethics that are involved and how it can affect people. But I want to emphasize that the autonomy to make decisions related to your children's care rests with the person, not with the government, and certainly not with us. We have to respect the people who are gaining treatments in these hospitals, whether they be patients or families. Our second contention explained that AI helps revolutionize the workforce in amazing ways. Because it is widely being used as a tool to supplement the work of humans rather than as a replacement, it is increasing worker output and improving the experience of students in schools, patients, and hospitals. My opponents say that low-skilled workers will not have a chance to get jobs. And let's be clear on what they're expecting here. They're expecting that the AI revolution will keep low-skilled workers in low-skilled jobs. That is fundamentally disdainful. We can put those low-skilled people into high-skilled jobs, just like has happened in past industrial revolutions. The reason why we're able to do this is because previously inaccessible education is now being made accessible. And that's why our evidence says that developing countries have seen 3 million new jobs created and filled by AI. Those include things like data scientists, machine learning experts, as well as jobs in the creativity and the arts. This also solves back for the dependence that they talk about. Because high-tech sectors are booming in developing countries, for example, Nigeria, this is one of the centers of Bitcoin, and India is one of the leaders in IT. These previously developing countries that were in the third world are now becoming on the cusp of innovation. They talk about automation, how recessions have always been followed by automation. And it's true that many jobs have been lost in industrial revolutions of the past. But over the long term, the standard of living has sharply increased. Next, in our second speech, Alex discussed climate change and saying that is possibly the most crucial application of artificial intelligence. Because the effects of climate change target marginalized people who don't have access to resources for adaptation. Their single most crucial problem right now is preparing for climate change. AI is revolutionary climate change strategies, both for prevention and adaptation. This is critical because my opponents concede that the Global Humanities Forum evidence from which they find that 98% of people seriously affected by climate change come from developing countries. This is the largest impact in today's debate because it affects the entire world, not just, and including marginalized communities everywhere. Each of my opponents' arguments are a reason to vote for the affirmative. Their first argument is inequality. To respond to this, we explain that a rising tide lifts all boats. When an AI causes an increase in output, everyone benefits. Consumer surplus is delivered to those who purchase products, which includes the poor and middle class, and innovations in pharmaceuticals and climate change are known to help the entire world. Like with past industrializations, those jobs that are lost will be replaced by better jobs. My opponents also bring up the point that the Industrial Revolution has led to wars, and they say that World War I and World War II were caused by the Industrial Revolution. Let's remember that as my team learned in AP World History and researched ever since, wars did not begin with the Industrial Revolution. European countries were in a state of constant conflict for the 70 years prior to World War I. There was literally no evidence to show that the Industrial Revolution was caused solely by these wars, and absolutely no evidence to show that AI will cause another war. My opponents bring up the point about China, saying that that Uyghurs are being oppressed, and it is absolutely true, but they never prove why they can tackle the root cause of China's oppression. Regardless of AI, China will continue to oppress the Uyghurs. But if we want to be able to help them, we need to spread awareness and deliver help from the West. AI is helping us do this. We can return to AI for Humanitarian Action, a $40 million collaboration between United General Assembly and Microsoft. These solutions are part of the reason why we urge you to vote for the affirmative. Thank you.
Congratulations, everyone, on completing the quarterfinal debate. At this time, we would like to invite the judges to take up to 10 minutes to complete their written ballots. My email will be sent in the chat so that you can email them to me. As a reminder, judges, once you complete your ballot, please send them to me via email. Thank you.